All right, so welcome to today's virtual panel discussion held through the APAC region. It's an initiative that's been created through our lovely local alumni chapters in the APAC region. So from Singapore, Malaysia, Beijing, Hong Kong, Japan. So lots of alumni chapters in APAC. So we're very happy to have that. And, we'll be going over sustainable development after the post-COVID today. And I really look forward to your discussion. So let me just share my screen to go over some housekeeping with you. And here we go. And 1 second. And so just so you know, you'll be muted upon arrival, so don't be shocked by that. And you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions, just so you know. And you can also upvote your questions that have been asked, or you can also comment on the questions if you'd like to. If you have a question, you could always send us a chat as well, if you'd like to. Or we also encourage really live engagement with our participants. So just raise your hand and I'd be happy to unmute you. So I'm going to leave the floor to Adi, our lovely moderator today, and I look forward to your discussion. All right, great.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa. And thanks to everyone from the panelists and from the attendees for this webinar, which is on sustainable development, as Melissa pointed out. And we're going to kind of understand a little bit more about sustainable development, but more from how businesses can handle this in a post-COVID context. So even before the COVID-19 hit, the Asia-Pacific region was kind of having a kind of mixed bag progress in terms of delivering on the sustainable development goals. So the prospects of success will obviously be influenced by the region's response and recovery strategies. And the pandemic has been undermining the progress towards the 2030 agenda. And it is a major setback for the Asia Pacific and also for the global sustainable development in itself. So for example, the UN estimates that 89 million more people in the Asia Pacific region have been pushed back into extreme poverty at the rate of $1.90 per day threshold, erasing years of development gains. So the economic and educational shutdowns are also likely to have severely harmed human capital information, productivity, and so it exacerbates poverty and inequality. So as the businesses struggle to kind of navigate this rather complex and uncertain kind of situation with the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, they need to remain aware of their responsibilities as partners in terms of building a sustainable future for the world. So in this regard, let me introduce our amazing panel who have come from across the world, spanning different time zones. Let me start by introducing Professor Ranjit Vula. He is an associate professor with the University of Sydney. His recent academic activities revolve around the SDGs. His papers have empirically examined how hybrid organizations affect social innovation, which is the primary mechanism by which the SDGs are realized. Furthermore, his other paper argues that goal number 2, which focuses on food security, has to be broadened to include food well-being, especially in the context of poverty. Ranjit has developed and teaches a unique unit relating to poverty alleviation, which challenges the assumptions for around for-profit firms and alleviating poverty, and also advocates for why and how for-profit firms should engage with the SDGs. We also have Ms. Alicia Tien. Alicia is born and raised in Malaysia and lived in Singapore, UK, and China. She's currently leading strategic partnerships at a tech incubator in Malaysia, which is also part of the largest innovation network in China. She works with the pre-seed to growth stage startups, the government, and venture capitals, mainly in the tech industry from Malaysia and China. She is also a current CEMS from LSE and Tsinghua University, where she is the head of sustainability for the CEMS Club in London. We also have Ms. Lubomila Jordanova, who is the founder and CEO of a Berlin-based startup developing an end-to-end platform that enables companies to measure, monitor, and reduce their environmental footprint and improve their ESG performance. She is also the co-founder of a community of 500 plus startups, which are connected to over 350 plus advisors from VC, media, and business, who help them monthly with advice and feedback. She has also worked in the investment banking, venture capital, and fintech industries in Asia and Europe, and she was recently announced as the Marshall Fund Fellow for 2021 and the 100 Top Women in Germany for 2020. And finally, we have Mr. Lior Groen, who is an impact-driven global business leader committed to shaping the future of technology, society, finance, and the environment. He is currently a principal at a Swiss-Singaporean venture firm, and Lior invests into and supports leading entrepreneurs and technology companies around the world. He's passionate about the role of emerging technology on society and the global financial system. He's a recognized thought leader on topics related to the future of finance, private enterprise, and capital markets. Welcome to all the panelists. Really nice to have you all here. And thank you so much once again for taking your time on a Saturday, on a weekend to join the CEMS network in kind of fleshing out the topic of sustainable development and how businesses and for-profit industries can embrace this in a post-COVID context. Next slide, please, Melissa. So let's start diving into our discussion with a few questions. The first question is how do you think has COVID affected or impacted the world of business or private? And maybe if you can point out some examples from any specific industries or countries that you're currently based in with regards to this impact. Let me probably start by directing that to Professor Ranjit. Professor Ranjit, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Adi. It's a great opportunity to be here from Sydney. I think before we actually answer that particular question about how has COVID affected and impacted the world of business, I think a more pertinent question is the question that Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever, asked. Stated, sorry, it's not a question, it's a statement. He said, business cannot succeed in societies that fail. So, I guess that's a really important statement to kind of reflect on. So is that true? Is it true that businesses cannot succeed in societies that fail? I would argue yes, because if society is not up to standards or a lot of poverty and that kind of stuff, it might be very difficult. And I think COVID has actually, obviously in some countries had a huge effect and changed how society functions to the worse, I guess. So I think the more pertinent question is, or kind of a statement is, COVID is actually provided as a great reflection point for business. Because some governments, such as the Australian government, is talking about the fact that business has to kind of be the main person for COVID recovery. And so I guess the bigger question here is, it provides a great opportunity to ask this particular question, which is, what is the role of business in society? Do these sustainable development goals and that kind of stuff actually provide an opportunity? So although it has had a huge impact across the 17 sustainable development goals, as you said, Abhi, poverty has gone up, hunger has gone up, something like 1.5 billion students have stopped studying throughout. But at the same time, I think it's a great opportunity for business to rethink these kind of societal challenges into potentially business opportunities.
Great, thank you so much, Professor. And I completely agree. Businesses, definitely cannot succeed in societies that can fail. And considering the APAC region, which is very a complex mixed bag of societal infrastructure in terms of their investments into, say, digital infrastructure, for example, or access to innovations and technology. And I think it's really important to see how to ascertain and assess the impact of COVID and how best we can use this as a reflection point, as you mentioned. Maybe I'd like to pivot that a little bit and ask maybe Alicia and Lior to kind of step in to see from your perspective, having worked in the impact investments and technology industries. I just wanted to maybe start with you both. How do you see this impact of COVID on business? And maybe if you can share your own examples of either from your own specific organization or any organization that you're aware about. Over to Lior, perhaps, to start.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Aditya. And look, I think this is a very topical thing. And Ranjit, you mentioned a very good point around, the more fundamental question is, what is the role of business in society? And I think at times of uncertainty like this, some of the mega trends that have really affected the economic development and the way in which society has evolved over the last years really come to the foreground. And I mean, I work in the technology industry, so we invest in the tech sector. And I think it's no secret that companies such as Apple, I mean, they sit on and have been many years now, sitting on balance sheets of some $200 billion in cash, right? And I think you look at the way in which some of these technology companies have accumulated so much wealth, right, and the power that they have. And some of them are holding bigger assets than many, GDPs of smaller nations, especially some of the ones most affected by, let's say, some of the economic uncertainty and downturn during COVID. And, the implications of this are huge because I think what inspires and allows these companies to grow is obviously their ability to scale internationally. So I think everyone can agree and acknowledge the US is one market, of course, a powerful one, but is certainly saturated in terms of service providers and vendors, and really the opportunity, the blue ocean opportunities that many companies are pursuing to grow into is really the rest of the world. And I think you see the responses that the Googles and Facebooks of the world have done to really build communities around, COVID responses, leveraging this as an opportunity to rebrand themselves and actually position themselves as change agents for good. And I mean, we even within the CEMS community, we have many colleagues and friends working at Facebook, for example, and very much deeply involved in those community building initiatives through things as groups and community outreach initiatives. So if you look at how top line companies are needing to adapt and respond to, let's say, the new working world, the new normal, really translates to operationally, I think opportunities like COVID is kind of a blue ocean for companies to come out and reposition themselves, reimagine what their businesses will look like, and the way in which they're perceived by the customers, and maybe they're not all bad. And I think these are some of the interesting developments that we're seeing more and more, let's say, come through.
Perfect, great, thank you, Alicia. Can you flesh out a little bit, as a young and upcoming, professional working in KL, maybe what have you heard from Malaysia?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, I just want to quickly echo on the point that it's a reflection, it's an opportunity for all the businesses to start reflecting, because I feel like the COVID situation has allowed all the businesses to it amplifies things. So some sectors are being accelerated and some sectors are being slowed down a little bit, and it also kind of highlighted some new values that emerged. I feel like collaboration is a huge one. I think Leo also mentioned that there's a lot of ecosystem building initiatives. In Malaysia, because I work in an incubator, the incubation industry is about a lot of co-working spaces. So that has completely changed now. Not many people want to work in real life. So there's been a huge shift online. So we're figuring out the new way of figuring out how to network, how to link our startups to investors, because usually we'll have networking in physical spaces, but now it's just, we have to, create some other type of values online, like classes or something that adds even more value. It reimagines the way we used to do things. And in the tech industry, for sure, we had a lot of startups that didn't make it during the pandemic, but also we have a lot of new exciting startups joining us. So I feel like it feels kind of like a reshuffle.
Great, thank you, and I completely agree. And I wanted to a little bit kind of touch base and unpack a little bit of the aspects that you mentioned in terms of how bigger companies are holding bigger assets, which kind of helps in their international expansion in a way, despite whatever that is happening with the world right now in terms of the pandemic. But on the flip side, companies are kind of building communities around the COVID response and kind of reshaping or rebranding, giving the opportunity to for certain sectors to, as Alicia pointed out, accelerate or perhaps kind of consolidate a little bit. And that's very interesting in terms of building the ecosystem in a new normal direction. And I think this goes really well with what Lubomila is trying to do, because you have, as a startup founder yourself, and you are also having a community of network of initiatives that you're doing. So maybe can you give your example, because it kind of feels like you might have had a lot of personal experience from hearing from your network of people that you've had. What was the impact of COVID on businesses and stuff?
COVID has been quite of a shocking, but also I would say a positive event for the sustainability topic that we are into. So just giving context for those that are listening, I focus on sustainability and decarbonizing essentially big corporates and predominantly financial institutions. And as a response of COVID, we actually built the Green Tech Alliance. This was really the main catalyst of us deciding to spend time and effort in connecting these different startups. And what this alliance does is essentially it connects now more than 600 startups from all over the world, really strong focus on Asia, Europe, and the US at the moment. And we're putting a lot of effort for Africa in the coming months. And we offer for free a lot of different, I would say, expertise and different resources that are useful for big companies and small companies, anyone that is building essentially a company. Our industry definitely saw a lot of positives from COVID. The investment increased significantly. The focus on the topic altogether and the attention that we started getting definitely also was shifted. And all of a sudden, this was not only a discussion amongst the startups, but also including governments, including other bodies. And another element has been, especially on the planning side, that we saw a lot of corporates actually shifting their attention towards sustainability, which at the end of the day benefited our business. On the flip side, I cannot skip echoing what was mentioned earlier. We definitely battled through a lot of chaotic months where there was a lot of confusion, a lot of term sheets being pulled, as well as a lot of discussions that all of a sudden abruptly were changed and shifted towards more of a crisis response. So until I would say we don't see an end in sight of this whole series of events, we cannot draw the line and say this has been a positive event. There's definitely been some shifts that enabled us to do our job better and without so many obstacles. But on the other side, there's been a limitation in resources. So creativity and communities actually helped us a lot throughout the year.
Great, and you know, I think just the fact that you mentioned that there has been this fundamental shift, and it's really still difficult to kind of assess whether the whole pandemic has been a sort of positive impact or a negative impact. And I think it completely depends on your own personal self-reflection at this point. You know, whether I think it has a mixture of both. And in terms of reshaping or rebuilding how businesses work, you know, I wanted to kind of maybe ask the next follow-up question is how do you think has businesses have they adapted to you know, as you all can see, we're all now on Zoom. You know, the catchphrase of 2020 was "you're on mute" all the time. So you know, how do you think that businesses have adapted, and in terms of, you know, operating or recruiting or training, onboarding staff, you know, because you kind of give this sense of a very hybrid organization moving forward. So is this impact, do you think, for the better or for the worse? Do you think that this kind of new normal is here to stay? You know, maybe let's probably start again with Professor Ranjit. You know, can you like maybe just flesh out from your understanding of involvement in the SDGs, for example?
Yeah, well, I guess just before we go on to that, Adi, I think one of the huge segment that we normally forget when we talk about business is the informal sector, or this huge, you know, people who we don't market to because they don't have much money.
Right.
So, for example, in India, 139 internal migrants, you know, overnight. Exactly. At 4 p.m., the government said it's going to stop, and the next day it stopped. And remember, these people work. The way they earn the money is they work daily. And when there was a lockdown, there was no work. And I think this is a very interesting topic as well, because obviously some things like COVID actually affects that place, those kind of people much more. And obviously there's a lot of business happening there as well. So I think that's, I just wanted to highlight that there are, you know, the informal sector, lots of people who are seriously affected, much more than, you know, losing a job, losing lives in some cases. In terms of business practices, I think one thing that has actually had, I guess, impetus before the COVID was this idea about having purpose. what does your company stand for, and all the rest of it. And I think now it's almost like, because of COVID and this pressure from both the United Nations in terms of the SDGs, national governments for businesses to engage with doing something good for the society. For example, in Australia, and I guess other countries, there was the banks gave 6 months kind of break for paying mortgages. And basically the Prime Minister said it's your duty to help the citizens of Australia in that kind of sense. So I think definitely from a broader, I guess, theoretical, broader strategy perspective, this idea, but the purpose seems to be extremely important. But equally important is, I don't know if you're into Bob Marley, any of you listening, he talks about, he's a singer, reggae, he talks about that, you can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. So I think as companies, kind of say that they're doing brand purpose and, they're doing good and all that, I think this authenticity and genuineness and actually doing good in terms of poverty or hunger or health, needs to be questioned. And I think consumers are increasingly more ruthless with companies that say something and do something else. So in summary, I think this idea of brand purpose seems to be taking much more of a, has been catalyzed much more by COVID.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor. I couldn't agree more, because, the whole aspect of self-reflection comes back again. You reflect on, what is your purpose, especially in these kind of very unpredictable times, as everyone likes to say these days. So in terms of the idea of purpose, I want to kind of go back to Lior, who mentioned, like this kind of situation, like really helps to, reshape or repurpose. What is your perspective on that, in terms of how businesses have operated this time?
Yeah, look, thanks, Aditya. And I would just add, I think many aspects here that we're covering, it really just shows globalization is something that we've taken for granted over the last 20, 30 years in the way mobility has worked. Companies are able to expand internationally. And I think that the lessons that we've learned during this period is yes, that these are very positive things. When they dry up and stop, there are challenges. But I think the ultimate implication is really just how fragile things are. And the knee-jerk reaction of many countries is to really go into that sort of isolationist, let's protect our interests mindset. And I think this has really been counterproductive. When we start talking about economic goals, agendas, and sustainable development goals, I think this has been one of the major reasons why, let's say, the COVID response takes longer to deal with and address from a macro perspective than we would like, because we are not a unified, de facto, we're not a unified community responding to a global challenge where we're independent nation states responding to what we see in front of us, which is very different realities. And then linking that to the role of the corporate sector, just some of the examples that we've dealt with, we're a relatively small organization, but we have employees on the ground in the US, Europe, and Asia. So we have 3 continents, let's say, to deal with. And just seeing the implications of, the US at one point had recalled all of their people who had left, a lot of our colleagues had left the US, returned to Europe over that period, and they were recalled after 6 months, or they would have had to face fines and legal implications because of not being able to fulfill their requirements of being a United States resident. And this has impacts on the tax system, which, again, from a COVID perspective and how the economy functions, such a minor detail, but in terms of the way it affects people's lives and therefore the way in which they engage in their corporate environment, I think this has been a fundamental shift in society. And I think the real implication of this is very clear. Going forward, we will see much more flexibility in the way in which companies and corporates are operating cross-border. And I think this opportunity now that we have as a result of COVID has made people aware of how fragile these systems are. And really need to build business contingency plans, business continuity plans to manage risks of some of these things. And I think in Asia, for example, many of the companies and countries are prepared and have experience dealing with major health outbreaks and crises, SARS, mad cow, many of the things that we've gone through. The rest of the world, couldn't imagine, never would have thought that this is a reality. If you told people you'd be in New York wearing a face mask, I think you would have been laughed out of even 12 months ago, right? So not that long. And I think these are the realities that business is now aware of and responding to those challenges. And that's really, I think, a good thing overall for everyone in making that a more sustainable way to do business and continue operating as such.
Great. Thank you, Lior. And
Avi, sorry, can I just
yes.
say something that Lior, so Lior, with the masks, so I had a kidney transplant about 2 years ago, and I was wearing a mask about 1 year before the COVID came, and everybody's laughing at me. And now everybody's wearing a mask. So for people like me, it's amazing. It's global education.
Exactly.
Indeed, indeed. And I mean, it only goes to show how fragile in itself, systems and policies and processes and us as individuals are. And maybe I wanted to go back to Lubomila on this because, Lior touched upon the fact that, also Professor Ranjit said the same in terms of the purpose. And, you as a founder of a sort of, let's say, purpose-driven enterprise in itself on environmental sustainability and monitoring the ESG performance. How do you see companies, in terms of altering their ways, in terms of, measuring their impact moving forward, or even during the times of COVID?
There's been a big reality check that we all went through in the last 12 months. And this has allowed us to understand that not only our supply chains are really fragile, but also the foundation of our values sometimes is either skipped or quite superficial, or at least superficial for these kinds of grand challenges that now COVID has offered us to go through. With this in mind, what we're seeing certainly as a company is a lot of companies in identity crisis and companies in a need to find their purpose as part of their revenue generating activities and define this really clearly so that they can engage better their employees, their customers, as well as their investors, who increasingly are asking questions about commitments to sustainability, commitments to better and improved situation of the employees and any stakeholders within the supply chain of the company. So this is quite, I would say, positive. It sometimes is a bit of a painful process for some companies. But as long as there's an understanding that this is a journey and you need to really go through a deep digging of your own identity and of your own understanding of where you actually fit within this whole bill of, I need to contribute to this society in this kind of manner, it is there to be a long-lasting benefit. When we work in sustainability, something that I'm quite challenged by on a daily basis, and we're trying actively to eradicate it, is greenwashing. And this is this element of finding your purpose, but only to use it as a marketing scheme. This is where we still need a lot of work to do on a policy and also on a company level, where these commitments maybe sometimes are just there to be in line with what's fashionable these days, and also make yourself more appealing to certain stakeholders and different target groups that you might have. But I am positive that with very little effort on the policy side, this can be really clearly defined and removed from the bill to make sure that our society really becomes healthier and happier.
Thank you. And I completely, I like the fact that how you mentioned that, companies are in an identity crisis, which echoes what, the other two panelists have already said. But the other thing that you mentioned was the foundations of our values are also like, kind of taking a reshaping or remodeling at this point of time. And what better way than to ask Alicia, because from an Asian context, we have a certain set of values that define Asia Pacific as a region. So how do you then see, from your understanding, say from Malaysia or Singapore or Thailand or any other Asia Pacific country, or even India for that matter, in terms of how businesses have are kind of operating or altering their way to as you mentioned, networking is a little bit different these days because it's everything is via Zoom. So like besides that, what else, what are some things that you observe from your work?
Yeah, of course. So for me, I feel like a lot of the startups that we're working with, they're really starting to, because a lot of them are trying to survive, to be honest. In Malaysia, quite hardly hit in terms of the economy, and a lot of them are just trying to find new channels to reach more people. they're using a lot of like Facebook Live or putting up webinars, things like that. So I think they're kind of exploring new ways to reach new people. So in a way, they're more they're more adventurous in terms of like figuring out how they can go about this. And like sustainability is also a question. It's also a topic that is starting to rise up even more in Malaysia, which is something I'm like very pleased about, because in Asian countries, it's lagging a little bit, as we might all know. So starting to be talked about, and people are starting to see like, okay, what is social enterprise, the notion of enterprise and things like that. And we also work with universities, so those universities are also starting to reach out to us and ask us to teach their students what social entrepreneurship is. So I feel like in a way that like on social is going to be part of just the word entrepreneurship. When you think of entrepreneurship, like it in the future, sustainability will be baked into it. At least that's what I hope. So that is the trend that we're looking at, but it definitely still needs work in terms of promoting sustainability.
Yeah. I think, Adi, just to go on with Alicia, I think, so essentially this idea, the purpose of business is to make profits, has been there for a very long time. And that's what we study in CEMS, I guess, and that's what our parents tell us and all the rest of it. So to change it is going to take some time. And I guess those people who have done the MBAs about 10, 15 years ago are the bosses now. So hopefully the present group of people are the ones who can, kind of, work through this redefining of what is the purpose of business, which is broader, includes societal. And then when they become managers, so when I teach my students here in CEMS in Sydney, I say you are the change makers kind of thing. You have to go there and tell your boss, maybe that's a better way of doing it kind of thing. So I think education plays a huge role there.
Indeed, and the aspect of socio-behavioral change starts with one person, and what better way to start at a university, because teachers, the teachers who teach the values to a certain set of students obviously then leave a huge impact, and CEMS obviously has left a huge impact on all of us in some way or the other, and which is why we're all gathered here to discuss a little bit about how best can we move forward in terms of what are some of the options that industries or companies need to consider in the post-COVID situation, so that companies can feel a little bit more better prepared. And as Leo pointed out, there is a deeper look through into risk management and business continuity planning, which sometimes you kind of feel it's probably not necessarily the most prioritized, at least in Asia Pacific. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alicia, but sometimes like business continuity plan is not, unless like a natural disaster hits, or if there's a fire or if there's a flood, then yes, you have a BCP, but nowhere really expected a pandemic to really affect your mindset. So in terms of the future options moving forward, what do you think companies need to really embrace, or countries in general, perhaps countries of where you're working in or regions where you're working in? What do you think they should embrace moving forward, Professor?
Oh, sorry, Tom. Yeah, so I think, sorry, I had a different question in my mind. I thought,
okay, so please, if you had a different question in your mind, you can ask that as well.
Just a statement. So I think there are actually new segments or opportunities opening up. So I think there's a huge target market that COVID has opened up, both at the vulnerable consumers as well as vulnerable employees. So for example, in the context of, say, Australia, when they first did the lockdown in COVID, there was so much stampede for these supermarket stuff, toilet paper especially, that all the older people and sick people were basically getting pushed aside. So what Coles and Woolworths, the major supermarkets, did was actually dedicated hours, certain hours in the day, to actually cater to them. And I think that's a great opportunity because like women, like the poor people, I think disabled are a huge target market. If you're clever, you can actually make a business opportunity with. And even with employees, take my own example, for example. I mean, I've had kidney, dialysis and, all kinds of transplant. And I haven't actually traveled for 5 years outside the country, even before COVID. I was like really prepared for COVID. But because of this COVID, I was able to go to conferences around the world on Zoom, which I couldn't have done before because they required face-to-face kind of thing. So I think there are huge opportunities for both employee kind of well-being as well as targeting vulnerable consumers. So.
Great. And I mean, over to Lior, because, I kind of unpacked the aspect that you mentioned about BCP and risk management. So would you want to flesh it out and see, from your perspective of, impact investment moving forward, what do you see, when you move forward in terms of the future?
Yeah, no, look, thanks for the opportunity to talk about it, because I think I'm a big believer in technology as an agent for change in society. And I think technology is always bound by, our ability to embrace it and adopt it. And it's never the technology itself, which is the barrier. It's, our willingness as people and as society to implement and adopt. So I think early on, there was a lot of hype around Zoom as a stock and how that performed during COVID, a lot of demand, etc. I mean, these are the sort of micro things that we look at. From a macro perspective, I think, what's been really relevant here is the way in which more and more companies now are changing their even management and organizational setup. So, within the industry, Coinbase is kind of one of the hottest IPOs of 2021 in the US, planning a $100 billion IPO. And one of the key features of their management team is that none of them live in the same state. So predominantly US, but none of them even live in the same state. And I think this fact that you can have such a successful business, tier one IPO opportunity, which all institutional money in the world is excited about, going forward and having this just shows the acceptance now in society for the way in which businesses can be run, society can operate and function, and it doesn't require everyone to turn up to the same office on the same day and do meetings, right? I think this idea of meetings for the sake of meetings, I mean, that's probably the other biggest meme behind you're on mute is, did we really need that meeting, or do you need the video on, and all of these things? And people are now very acutely aware of that. So, from my point of view and what we see things, so we invest in and support many early stage entrepreneurs. And what really stands out about that is always their hustle and drive to get things done, right? And if I really call it what it is, there's no bullshitting around, right? They're not sitting and taking meetings for the sake of meetings. Their performance is being measured. They're hungry. They're early stage companies. They're looking to scale rapidly. And I think that the way in which business now and people are ready to take decisions, right? And another firm example is we had always had the policy, we would never invest in a company that we hadn't gone and physically met. So if you haven't been there, I mean, talk about just before the lockdown, I was in India meeting with a company that we liked a lot. This mindset has shifted now, where it's, of course, always valuable to be able to go and sit down with people, but we've had to adapt. And I think that's really come now as a mindset change. And there's no longer this firm requirement that I need to go and sit in a room for 2 hours or 5 hours with you before being confident that I can trust you, believe in you as a person, and support your business for the next 3 to 5 years. And this real mindset change, I think, is really the main implication of this, which is why personally, not discrediting and discounting many of the catastrophic things the world has had to go through to get to this point, but I'm very bullish and supportive of what comes next. That macro business environment that comes next is fundamentally different and, for me, opportunity rich, I would say.
Yeah, thank you, Lior. We have slowly started to get some questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to that once when you finish this hearing from the two other panelists on this and getting their understanding as well. I wanted to, go to Alicia now, taking the aspect that Lior mentioned about technology being the agent for change. And you mentioned in the previous question about the fact that, the Malaysian economy was hit pretty bad, and a sort of survival instinct came into effect for a lot of startups, who were trying to find out different ways to how to reach more people. In terms of moving ahead, what do you see? Do you also echo what Lior mentioned in terms of the overall macroeconomic understanding or macro level policies that needs to be in place?
Yes, I 100% agree. So the company that I'm in, what we're doing now as well is to really try to hammer down on the regional collaboration instead of just between countries, because we're also like we also have a few camps across the world. So what we're trying to do now is to have a regional collaboration with all the global offices to help startups understand the Chinese market. And that would have, it's the first thing that, it's the first time that we're doing this, and we have never thought about that even before this, because it used to be very traditional, like we had to travel different places to like meet the mentors and everything. And now a lot of the mentoring that we're doing with our startups are online, which we never tried before. A lot of the demo days are also online. So so I definitely feel like this change is good, because the startups are kind of like across regions as well. They're not in one place. You used to have to like travel and meet people. So now like it changed in that sense, which I think it will like reduce the carbon footprint, which I'm like also quite happy about. And it's very like efficient. And in terms of the startups and how they are adopting the new situation, I feel like for them, I was speaking to a few of them. They were saying that now that everything is online, they can kind of like capture more opportunities, because people are way open to talk to people online, whereas like before this, it's like a courtesy to meet face to face. You mentioned, so it definitely flattened the world a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, as you mentioned, change is good, but a change that is green, sustainable, equitable, and inclusive is much better. And I wanted to hear from Lubomila on that, you know, because Alicia mentioned that they were able to capture more opportunities because, you know, everything right now is on Zoom, everything is online. So from your understanding, you know, as a startup founder and your network as well, you know, how do you see the future moving ahead in terms of companies or startups or SMEs?
So I think one important realization is to look at the data, which is what we do in my company quite a lot. And what it shows us is that in 2020, our planet only reduced its emissions by 7%. And this has led to only an increase on the path of, a decrease on the path of increase of temperature by 0.01 degrees Celsius, which shows us that actually, as much as it felt to us that the whole planet stopped and nothing was actually moving, industry and business were booming. All these masks that we had to use on a daily basis, all of these plastic gloves, they had to be produced somewhere. And even China, that stopped for 3 months, essentially, its whole economy managed to bounce back and increase by 12% its output in the quarter after. So in line with your question, what this means is that we have a lot of work still to do in order to make this society ahead of us and the future of this society equitable, sustainable. All of the inefficiencies and all of the discriminations that have existed in our society before got fleshed out in 2020, but that doesn't mean that they got resolved. There's been minorities, Professor Anjit also mentioned earlier about other groups in society that faced more, I would say, inequitable and challenging reality that they had to deal with. So I don't feel like we have gone through a significant process. We are very privileged people in this particular group, and we should be really grateful for the position that we have, where our world was actually made more efficient and more, I would say, open for opportunities, just because I could text Alicia on LinkedIn and then we'll have a chat in a few weeks or so. But that's not the reality of everyone. So with this, I think I still feel like a lot of the big issues that we faced as a society in 2019, 2020, our reality today as well. And maybe the good thing, and at least what makes me hopeful, is that we at least know about them, and we have had to face them for a whole year, which maybe is going to allow us to address them more effectively, because now we really understand that our society is really inefficient in many ways, and also not so well adapted to crises and disturbances. And if I go to my favorite and most important topic, climate change, ahead of us, there's a lot more of these. So hopefully we learn and we prepare.
Indeed. And there's, like what all the panelists, as you mentioned, the whole aspect of identifying your purpose, taking this opportunity of the COVID pandemic as a self-reflection point to really look at the data to make sure that you effect change, but changes that can be inclusive, to include those people who sometimes, as the UN likes to say, leave no one behind, so, and that requires a really, I guess, a collection of different stakeholders to come together. And me, personally, I'm a huge fan of SDG 17, which is partnerships for the SDGs, because I believe that partnerships is really important to bring in all the stakeholders necessary to achieve the 16 other SDGs. So SDG 17 for me is kind of the basement where we all need to work together. And I think that really, echoes well within the CEMS community and the CEMS network in itself, as we all come together to address some of these topics. I want to open the floor right now to any questions that you may have. And we actually have one question, which I would like to pose to the panelists. Thank you, Fabian, for the question. The question is, companies have now a lot of pressure from different societies to take an ideological stand of certain geopolitical issues. That is the H&M Nike cotton debacle in China, often often masqueraded as ESG. Do you see these problems increasing as the China-USA conflict progress? And how do companies navigate these problems when they are in both markets? And will companies need to choose between the US or the Chinese markets? Let me start off with our resident ESG expert, Ms. Lubomila, to share your thoughts, because I wanted to understand also from a data perspective as well, as you say, what do companies make of the situation? What do you think of the situation yourself?
A fundamental challenge with ESGs is that there's way too many frameworks and way too little alignment in terms of what actually ESG stands for. Some companies have a questionnaire that is with 10 questions that defines the whole ESG data collection process for their subsidiaries and for any investments that they make. Others have 300 questions, which go even down to a level about how healthy is the soil of the hectares of land on which your office is built, which, for some companies is totally irrelevant. That poses a challenge for us to actually have a unified understanding of who is performing well on the ESG topic versus not. And it has been proven by use cases such as, or actually example cases such as, for example, Boohoo, a fashion company being called top performer in ESG, while actually producing some of the most wasteful types of clothes that are made from polyester and are also done in really bad conditions, which was proven as well with not only data, but even evidence such as videos and photos. So having this in mind, we should be able to understand that it's quite challenging to maybe think of ESG as a unifying framework yet. There's a lot of effort happening on a venture capital level, on a private equity level. We're also offering support to our clients on that topic because it could be quite confusing as well. But I think it still is quite, I would say, messy. And if I go to the question of Fabian, what is really important is to dial down on what Lior said earlier. We are in a situation now where countries have, to some extent, pretended to be collaborating, but at the end of the day, they've been focusing on an individual protection that would allow for them to maximize the positive outcome for their own society, which is kind of understandable. But on the other hand, if we don't collaborate, the efforts are going to result in what is happening at the moment in Europe, where there's a total discrepancy in terms of the state of vaccination and other kind of societal improvements across the board, like Germany, France, Belgium. Everyone is taking their own stance, and everyone is going through their own waves of further cases. So what, from my understanding of the question, what is really clear is that we're going to have to definitely, unfortunately, observe more protectionist behavior from countries. And that is going to result in challenges also for businesses. One example is the blocking of vaccines to get to Australia. You know, we know quite a lot of things that have happened over the last few weeks. And if you take any industry, actually, you would see such examples. I can give only one final example of a friend of mine who has a business that produces bottles similar to these. Well, you can't see it because I'm blocked, but like this. And he ordered his first batch as an entrepreneur. This was basically his asset, and they had developed the technology, the design, and everything so that it's super sustainable. And he comes from Asia, and he operates his business in Asia, but the packages were blocked. Just part of the packaging got blocked in Russia. And in Russia, they told him, if you want to take your package, you have to pay X amount for it to stay with us for another month until the other borders open, or we're going to destroy your order. And obviously, then it had been destroyed. And basically, a year of efforts and a big investment got eliminated. So, yeah, small example, mighty learning.
Yeah, small example, mighty learning indeed. I wanted to ask if any other panelists wanted to flesh out their insights on this question from Fabian as well. Especially Lior, I think you mentioned specifically about that, you know, please go ahead.
I think it's definitely a topic, right? And it starts off as an ideological one, and I think it can be framed that way. But the implications of it are very practical and tangible. And the best example I always give, as someone, I'm Australian, many years in Europe and working in Asia now, based in Singapore. It's really this notion of how business is done is just fundamentally different. And the ESG lens is an additional layer on top of this. But the fundamental policies and this needing to decide or choose a side on this great global conflict or tension, I mean, it just fundamentally comes down to the way in which businesses operate. And if you go to the West, Europe and the US, we've always kind of been brought up with this mindset of, you know, you never do business with friends, never mix work and pleasure. This is kind of a very just a standard thing which is universally accepted. And if you come to Asia, I mean, it's basically you cannot even try to do business with people who are not your friends. It's a foreign concept for people to even have these relationships with people they don't know and don't understand or feel they don't understand them. So when we talk about the implications of this, I mean, absolutely, people, companies, corporates, governments will need to be forced into choosing sides. I mean, no one wants to do this, but it's just the reality. If you're not present making those relationships, you've de facto chosen that you don't want to be a part of the way in which Asia operates as an economic region. And, you know, being brought up and raised in Australia, I saw this firsthand. The US was for a very long part of our history our most dominant trading partner. Slowly but surely, of course, China has displaced that. And nowadays, I mean, the economic relationship between China and Australia has been the most polarizing topic when it comes to domestic politics and the way in which people are responding to this, especially now with many of the trade tariffs being imposed on our biggest exports, iron ore, coal, wine, which China has, you know, one-sidedly come out and done on the Australian market. So people will be pushed into choosing and making, you know, signs around this. And I think the whole ESG narrative around this is an additional layer that we consider because, in fact, whether we like it or not, unfortunately, I wish it wasn't the case, but the ESG narrative is portrayed fundamentally different based on where you are. So in the East, it's the West created this problem, and now we're, you know, carrying your problem and trying to adapt. And in the West, no, we're all part of the same economy, and we need to do this together. And try explaining to people in India and China why they shouldn't be able to use coal-fired power plants when they have people who are below the poverty line and not able to have any electricity. I mean, these are things which are just fundamentally, it's not an even playing field. And as the, let's say, the economic might of the East grows, they will push people into more polarizing situations. And you will see more countries like Australia. Australia is just the first one. You'll see more countries, you know, on the fringe, let's say, who are being pushed in certain directions and forced to take decisions here, which are very difficult ones to make.
Indeed. tough decisions to make, and we have to it goes back to understanding your own values, where you start, and using the aspect of self-reflection, which keeps coming up again and again as the concept as well. We do have two other questions. Let me take one at a time. The first question again is from Christelle Zhang. She asks, do you think after COVID, companies will invest more or less in sustainable development? As when companies are not performing as great as before, they usually retract their investment in sustainability initiatives. I leave the question open to anyone who wants to jump in, maybe Lubomila again to start.
Definitely fantastic question. In my opinion, there would be no future without considering sustainability within your own activity. And that is not because this is a trend that is being imposed on us. It's because it's the only way forward if we really want to build this equitable and sustainable, durable society that we want to see post-COVID. We learned through COVID that there's still a lot of things that we need to improve. Supply chains is just a small example. And what this gives us now as an opportunity is to learn what it really requires for us to achieve this societal improvement that all of us here are working towards. So definitely companies will be investing more because they actually would be making more revenue if they do so.
And I think just very quickly, I think it's also important. I mean, I just want to kind of reiterate what Alan Job from University said. It's actually the wrong assumption. So if sustainable and sustainable development goals are not costs, and we have this idea that they're costs, but they're actually benefit. And he says that, so to the same question, the CEO of Unilever is saying it's a benefit. So in fact, it'll actually increase. And we need to change that mindset about that it's a cost.
Indeed. We are cutting short of time. There's one more, or actually a couple of more questions as well. And there's one more question in the chat box. So let's try to see if we can take these questions quickly. The next question is from CM, who asks, COVID has accelerated the digitalization, it's a tough word, of the economy, increasing the carbon footprint of internet. Can this have an impact on international carbon objectives? And CM also asks another follow-up question. Do you think COVID-19 crisis will stimulate the development of sustainable circular economies, or will supply chains remain global? Professor Ranjit, do you want to maybe first reflect, and then we'll go to Lubomila?
Yeah, probably the second question first. I think circular economy just kind of makes sense. So as I said, I think just going back to the previous thing, it's actually a benefit. Consumers want that kind of stuff. Like for example, look at Patagonia, they're talking about don't buy our stuff. So they're trying to drive how consumers, used to think about consumption. So the consumer needs and wants are changing towards the circular economy, recycling. I can see it in my 12-year-old child who actually wants to go to, she doesn't want to buy new stuff. She just wants to reuse from other places. So I think that's actually an advantage these days for certain consumers.
Lubomila, and then I want to bring Alicia as well. Lubomila, please, over to you.
Fantastic to have such a great example, Professor Ranjit, from your child. It's really a lot that we can learn from the way also the younger generations think about the topic. I'm also seeing it within my own cousins who are buying secondhand because it's cool, and it's really fantastic to see that this is how they think. Carbon footprint of the internet is quite significant. If you even drill down into certain industries, it gets worse. I'm sure Leo has some comments about the blockchain industry and all the cryptocurrencies and the trading of them. I think, so first of all, there's a few international bodies that are trying to, at the moment, create a universal understanding of this. And I'm happy for the person that asked this question to contact me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share more information and links. And if I just can kind of give an example of a practical request that we have from one of the banks we work with, actually it's not even about only the kind of online part of it, it's also about the equipment itself. Hardware is the fastest growing waste stream at the moment, so e-waste as it's called, which is really scary because we do not have the capacity internationally at the moment to recycle it properly. So both of these issues are quite severe, and there's a few initiatives, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you, Lubomila. I wanted to go over to Alicia quickly before we ask have our final question. Alicia, as you know, consumerism is big in Asia Pacific. So how do you understand from the questions that CEMS asked us?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question because again, I feel like Malaysia specifically, it's in terms of sustainability, it's still a little bit lagging. However, I am seeing more startups, initiatives really trying to capitalize on how they're doing like zero waste and things like that. But I really think there needs to be a lot to be done, because when we speak to most of the startups, they don't think about sustainable processes and like circular economies and things like that. So I think there needs to be a lot of education to be done as well, and it's also something we're trying to like implement in at the incubator them, and to like kind of promote the notion of
Great. And I see we're a little bit over time, but I'm just going to ask this one last question that we have in our chat box, where I see that Lior has shared a link already, but I just wanted to get some reflections from the panel. Simang Wong asks, I'm not sure if it's too late to ask. It's not too late. I'm curious about impact investing and ESG investing. What kind of analysis method do you use to analyze the value before investing and evaluate the result after the investment is closed from a social perspective? Lior and Lubomila, over to you guys. Lior first, and then Lubomila.
Yeah, I'll let her take probably the more important part, which is the data, which I think is the key here. And I think that for me is very clear. Just by way of background as well, I'm also involved in a non-profit organization called Shaper Impact Capital. I'm happy, Simang, to connect bilaterally after this and provide more details there. We're very much focused on supporting impact startups and entrepreneurs, and we have our own methodology for assessing and evaluating whether companies fit our requirements. But I mean, politically speaking, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest problem is that there is no uniform way of doing that, right? And I think there are frameworks, as we've touched on already, there are too many frameworks possibly, as well as too many well-intentioned people and people who are abusing the system, let's say greenwashing. It doesn't make the job easy. And I'll let, let's say, the professional actually give a more data-driven answer, because I think that's really what you're after. But as I said, happy to connect and exchange some of our learnings on this.
So I would definitely, I'm just going to jump straight into giving examples to make the most of the time. So one framework to look at is the SASB framework, which is a general framework for ESG assessment. Another one to look at is Nesta. Nesta is a UK organization, but they've done a fantastic job of defining the different factors that actually contribute to building and having good or kind of even significant societal impact, a positive one. And then a final initiative to look at, which I'm sure Leo is familiar with, is London School of Economics, which was actually my home school when I was in CEMS. They have an investment fund called Horton Street, which is the street of LSE itself. And Hannah is actually driving at the moment more than 80 VCs in unifying the understanding of ESG. So if you're a professional in the space, you're more than welcome to join. It's open community. You just need to contact Hannah and her colleagues. And please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to give the links and also the names of the people that are involved in that.
Great, thank you so much. Any other final remarks before we close from any of the panelists? Do you want to reflect on any of the questions? If there is nothing, then I'd like to thank you all. Thank you all for your time, especially on an Easter weekend, as everyone says. Wishing you all a very happy Easter from Bangkok to wherever you are currently based. Thank you all for thank you all the attendees for your beautiful questions, which I believe you have very insightful answers from our panelists. Please feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn. We're all available there, so please feel free to reach out to us. And over to Melissa for some final remarks. Thank you.
Right. Thanks so much for your input, everyone. We really appreciate giving your time to the CEMS community. It's really awesome. So just a few wrap-up announcements, and just to let you know, we do have the CEMS podcast now. They're in their second season, so check that out. Follow, subscribe as you wish. It's an initiative run by the Student Board, but also the CAA, which is the CEMS Alumni Association. So they'll be having different episodes from stakeholders of the community. So go for that through Spotify and Apple as you wish. And one last thing is we do have the CEMS Alumni platform now. So check that out. You'll see future upcoming webinars there in the events page, like this one. And but we also have a CEMS webinar series that will also be taking place on April 22nd. And it's with a professor from LSE, Professor Locke, who will be discussing making your voice heard, moderated by Professor Bachman, who's a UCD professor at Smurfit. So make sure you check that out. And one last thing is we do have a survey at the end before you leave today. Feel free to fill that out. It takes no more than 2 minutes, I promise. And it'd be nice to hear about what other topics you'd like to hear about. Okay. All right. Well, thank you once again to everyone. I wish you a wonderful weekend, great evening in the APAC, and also an afternoon in, in Europe. So I look forward to seeing you again. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care, and I'll send you guys some follow-up. Have a great one. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks again, everyone.
See you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.